Hi, welcome to the Historical Table. I'm Rachael A. Beyer, the John W. Emery family Assistant Curator of Oral History at History Colorado. Today we're going to step back in time to the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, to take a look at what was on the table in Colorado's boarding houses. The Colorado boarding house was an important place for single men or single women, normally not in the same boarding house, to be able to find inexpensive and clean place to stay and to be able to have their meals taken care of for them. Boarding houses were also an essential income for widowed women who were looking to be able to take care of themselves and their children after they'd lost their husbands. Women who ran boarding houses would provide food, that is meals for the people staying with them, as well as take care of laundry and provide a clean space for those people to sleep. Boarding house meals needed to be inexpensive and economical. And so what we often see in boarding house recipes are recipes that are reusing leftovers from the day before or using inexpensive ingredients to provide filling food that's tasty but not expensive. I hope that you'll join us for our live program where I'll talk more about the history of Colorado's boarding houses. Today we are going to take two recipes from a very popular cookbook for boarding house proprietresses. The cookbook was called Lowney's Cookbook. Lowney's was a chocolate company, and so all of their color illustrations in the cookbook all focus on chocolate recipes. We're not going to talk about chocolate today because what we're looking to do is we're looking to reproduce some of the recipes from the chapter in Lowney's Cookbook called Economical Recipes. So what would be on the dinner table in a Colorado boarding house? Well, you would always start off with a main course. That could be a piece of meat, like a pot roast or a mutton roast, some saltback pork, perhaps a fried fish. It also could be a soup or a stew that had either meat left over from the day before or beans to give it that hearty feeling that the clients of the boarding house needed. You would always have a side dish of some sort, normally locally sourced vegetables, possibly combined, like our vegetable croquettes, with leftovers from the day before. Additionally, you would have a starch of some sort. Bread or crackers were kind of the norm, but it could be something like rice, which we're repurposing in our vegetable croquettes today. And then finally, you'd have a dessert of some sort, most often something like a cake, something that could easily be made in a single serving and then cut into pieces. So today we're going to make vegetable croquettes and hot water gingerbread. Let's go ahead and get started with our vegetable croquettes. Now, as you can see from the original Lowney's recipe on the screen in front of you, vegetable croquettes, this recipe at least anyway, were really a catch-all to reuse ingredients or leftovers from the day before. And this one calls for a bunch of leftovers: cooked rice, baked beans, mashed potatoes. I'm going to add in one extra leftover, but to get started with this recipe, the first thing we actually want to do is make a roux. And that is, we're going to get some butter melted and incorporate some flour into that. So I'm going to go ahead and put my butter on medium and get that melted down. And once I do that, I'm going to add in my flour. The purpose of combining butter and flour, which is called a roux, is to help serve as a thickener for your whatever it is you're making. It's used in a lot of sauces and things like that. So you've probably made one before. But if you haven't, the purpose of doing the roux is to help cook down the flour before it serves as a thickener. So so that you don't get that raw flour taste in your recipe. So after it's cooked down for 3 to 5 minutes, it'll start changing color a little bit as the butter browns and the flour gets cooked. And it's at that point that you want to add your vegetables. Now, our original Lowney's recipe calls for a half a cup of tomato. I don't happen to have that, but I do have some leftover sauteed carrots and onions from last night's dinner. So I'm going to throw that in instead of my tomatoes because that's what I happen to have. Really, they're called vegetable croquettes, not tomato croquettes. So you can really add anything that you want for that half a cup of vegetable. My suggestion would be that you add something cooked, because it's not going to cook long enough at any other stage in this to cook those things down. So my carrots and onions, for example, are fully cooked. They're soft, they're ready to eat. If you cook down with, if you use tomatoes, they'll be juicier. And so you'll want to make sure that you cook it down to a drier consistency. With my carrots and onions, there's really no residual liquid in those. And so it's not going to really take very long. I just really want to kind of stir those up and incorporate those and then remove them from the heat. At this point, you can incorporate all the rest of your ingredients and just mix them into a bowl. Now, I must admit that through the miracle of filming this from my own apartment, I actually have already done this, and I just happened to forget to record. So fortunately, it wasn't a very complicated process. I just threw my 1 cup of cup rice from last night, my 2 cups of baked beans, a half a cup of mashed potatoes. I didn't happen to have any white mashed potatoes, so I used a half a cup of sweet mashed potatoes, along with my stove vegetables and roux and salt and pepper to taste. Now you remember I would suggest thoroughly incorporating your mixture before you salt and pepper. Mostly because if you are using those leftovers, the baked beans, the mashed potatoes, the carrots and onions, things like that, you probably have already seasoned all of those. And so you'll just definitely want to mix everything together and taste it before you add additional salt and pepper. Then at that point, you want to stick it in the fridge until it's completely cool. So I've already done that. I already combined all of my ingredients and I mixed them together and I just smushed them down into the bowl and covered it with cling film. And I'm going to put that in the fridge for a couple of hours until it's nice and cold. And when that's ready, we'll be able to pull them out, shape them into croquettes, and fry them. So let's go ahead and get started with our gingerbread. This gingerbread recipe is very fast. And I've already put into the bowl my flour and my baking soda. I'm going to add a half a teaspoon of kosher salt, because I like kosher salt, but you should add any kind of salt that you want. We're also going to add 1 tablespoon of ginger. And I'm just going to pour that in like this. I'd probably get a little bit extra there because I like ginger. Okay. So once I have my dry ingredients combined, I'm just going to do that. Then we need to add 4 tablespoons of butter, which I've already pre-melted or pre-softened anyway, so it's nice and soft. We also need to add 1 cup of molasses. Molasses was a much less expensive sugar than cane sugar in our time period that we're looking at. And so molasses would have been a less expensive ingredient for the boarding house proprietress to make a very quick dessert for her patrons. Go ahead and get that in there. And then we need to add a half a cup of boiling water. I always like to put my molasses in first because then I can use the boiling water to kind of swirl out the rest of that molasses in the mixing cup, or in the measuring cup, excuse me. I'm going to mix all of that together. And you want to make sure that your oven, like the recipe calls for on the recipe card, is preheated to 375, because once you add the hot water to that baking soda, you want to get it into the pan right away. So I'm going to go ahead and get that mixed until all of the dry ingredients are just wet. And then you pour that into a buttered pan or a pan that you've sprayed. And I like to line mine with parchment paper because it's a little bit cleaner to clean up at the end. So I'm just going to spread that. My butter's not quite melted there. Get that melted in. I'm just going to spread that out onto the pan. And pop it into the oven. So now that we have our gingerbread in the oven, we can go ahead and pull our croquettes out of the refrigerator where they have been, where they've been chilled, and we can go ahead and fry those up. So our mixture is cold, it's refrigerator temperature. So now we're going to go ahead and form these into croquettes. The shape of them really, I think, depends. There's no instructions in the cookbook, and I think the shape of them really depends on how you want to fry them. If you're planning on deep frying them, we can shape them into the kind of oblong ovals that are croquette shaped. If you're going to pan fry them in a skillet, you probably want to shape them more into small patties so that you get a nice color on both sides. And if you are one of those air fryer people, I'm sorry, I don't have a recommendation for you. I don't have one myself. So I will let you folks experiment with it. And if you end up with something that works, let us know and we'll stick it in the comments. Okay, so let's go ahead and get these shaped. I'm going to deep fry mine, so I can shape mine into kind of a standard croquette shape, which kind of looks like that. That's just a little over a tablespoon of mixture. So I got 21 croquettes with my mixture, and they're all about 2 tablespoons apiece. And I'm going to go ahead and deep fry mine because that's what method I'm going to use. Okay, so I'm all done frying my fritters. They took about 90 seconds a piece at a properly heated oil in deep frying. And this is what they look like when they're finished. I ended up losing a couple, two of my croquettes I ended up losing. They kind of broke apart. They were super carroty. They had a lot of carrot chunks in it. So that might be something to keep in mind. I didn't cut my carrots up any smaller than the little discs that they were. You might want to chop them up finer. But otherwise, they turned out really, really well. They're tasty. They taste kind of like fritters. And I think they're delightful. Mine are a little bit on the sweet side because I used carrots instead of tomato, and also because I used sweet potato instead of white potato. But I think with some hot sauce, they're going to be fantastic. So I'm really looking forward to these. Okay, so I think our gingerbread is almost ready. I'm just going to take my knife. A sharp knife. I'm going to put it into the gingerbread, and if it comes out clean, we're done. And it does. So let's go ahead and get that out of the oven. And here is what it looks like when it comes out. Nice and dark gingerbread from that molasses. Just going to put that on a cooling rack and leave it to cool. You can serve it while it's warm. You can wait till it's cool and serve it cool. However you want to serve it. But a nice, inexpensive cake recipe that has very few ingredients in it, and inexpensive ingredients is that. So it would have been perfect for a boarding house. Here at home in the 21st century, enjoying it with a little bit of whipped cream or a scoop of ice cream just does the trick. It's really great. So, so that is our gingerbread recipe. So today we made vegetable croquettes and we made gingerbread. I hope that you have had fun with this program and that you join us for our live program to find out more about Colorado's boarding houses.